Hello, everyone, and I hope you're having a great Tuesday. We've got a great event planned here, and we're going to get started here very, very shortly. But before we get started, I'd like to find out where everyone is calling in from. Feel free to chat in the chat box where you're calling in from, and we'll get started, let's say, in about 5 minutes or so. And so far, I think you're the furthest away, or I'm the furthest away, one of the two.
Yeah. I'm the only East Coaster or Southeast Coaster. Ah, Winnipeg. All right.
Yeah. You're still a little further south, though, Ken.
Yeah.
Oh,
Nice.
Devon, yes.
So I think right now it's almost like West Coast, East Coast, a little in the center, up north.
Yep.
Give it a few more minutes and then we'll get started.
Yeah.
Leah, we should say it twice just on the questions. Maybe while we're waiting a few minutes, we've got a nice little promotion for everybody.
That's a good point. So if you have any questions for us, feel free to submit them in either the chat box or in the Q&A box, either place. And a couple of people have submitted questions ahead of time too, which is great. But if you submit questions today, we will give you a blameless t-shirt. Everyone who submits a question that we answer on the air will get a blameless t-shirt.
So they just email hello@blameless.com.
Yeah, I'll
Afterwards.
go through I was going to go through the details later, but basically you send an email to hello@blameless.com after the webinar, include your shipping address and size, and we'll get the t-shirt off to you if we read your question during the webinar. We usually get to all of them, so.
All right.
Okay, well, let's get started here now. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to Championing Change, the Real Stories of Engineering Innovation. My name is Lee Atchison. I'm your host today, and also I'm the Chief Reliability Officer at Blameless. Today, we're set to uncover the pathways from the initial spark of an idea, to a successful implementation within your organization. Today, we're going to be talking about change, so I wanted to start by telling a quick little story that many of you are already familiar with. But in the late 1990s, a small team of engineers at a now famous thriving tech company was facing a storage problem. They had been tasked with creating a more efficient way to index the burgeoning internet, but their servers kept crashing. The company, which at the time was still a startup, didn't have the funds for high-end expensive hardware. So one of the engineers had a eureka moment while playing with some inexpensive toys at his desk. Inspired by the construction of a cheap and cheerful Lego brick structure, he proposed a radical idea. Why not build their server casings out of toy building blocks? It was an unconventional and whimsical, certainly not something you'd expect in the serious world of tech. But it worked. The lightweight Lego Kings were cost effective and allowed for easy access and air circulation, keeping the servers cool and operational. That engineer was at a startup named Google, and the Lego server is now part of tech lore. It's a reminder to all of us that sometimes the most innovative solutions don't come from a high-end lab or a boardroom strategy session. They come from the freedom to play and the willingness to see possibilities in just even the simplest toys that are around us. So joining me today is my co-host is Ken Gavradovich. Ken is the COO of Blameless, and Ken has a rich history of driving organizational change and growth. He's also a great friend of mine and co-author. So Ken, glad to see you today.
Good. So as Lee mentioned, Ken Gavradovich, COO Blameless. Really excited to dig into some of the stories. Just for background, back when the internet, just to date myself, when the internet might be a fad, in my early 20s, I started a company called web.com, which was one of the largest hosting companies in the world before kind of cloud computing. We were early on in that, built a really nice business, took it from you and me putting, our desks together to start up. Done big transformations like with Andy Jassy. We'll talk about some of those stories, worked at companies like New Relic. So really had the experience of taking ideas to IPOs, worked with literally thousands of companies driving transformation. So I've seen the patterns of kind of what works and not, and really excited to talk to the team and everybody about that today.
Great. And just for completeness, my name's Lee Atchison. I'm currently the Chief Reliability Officer at Blameless, but my background includes, Packard, Amazon, New Relic, and other small companies and large companies. But probably the most relevant to this discussion or to a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about is I worked for almost 8 years at Amazon, and the last several years of that were at AWS. So it was in the very early days of AWS, and I helped and I created the Elastic Beanstalk service and at AWS. I'm also the author of O'Reilly Media's Architecting for Scale book and also Overcoming IT Complexity. So, and Ken and I have a book as well, Business Breakthrough 3.0. This is a book that both Ken and I wrote together. We were also going to be joined by Jim Gochi, who's the Blameless CEO, but he got caught up today, and unfortunately, with a last minute change, he's not going to be able to join us. So, Ken, it's going to be just you and I. Let's get started with this question, Ken. How do you take an idea and turn it into a pitch, something that's actionable?
It's a good question. So I think probably the first part is, before you get into the ideas, you see a problem. And I've seen this many, many times. I think about the first commercial software package they ever wrote. I went and saw a lot of people just doing inefficient things. I'm like, oh, I can write software to automate that. So I think the first part is thinking about what is the business problem that you're understanding, right? That you see something that your company could be better. And what is it in business terms? Because I've seen sometimes, especially for all of us that have a technical engineering background, sometimes there's just things that annoy us, right? That you're like, why does that code's so brittle? That system, why don't we spend more money? And we got to keep in mind is if it annoys us, but it's solving the business problem that it's designed to solve, maybe that's not the best thing to go solve, right? Maybe there's a business reason why, unfortunately, maybe in some cases, the business has made a decision to underinvest. But I think the key is if it's one of those things, make sure that the company's doing it purposefully. So if you see something that is a business problem to solve, then start thinking about it in those terms. Okay, what is this business problem? And if I help solve it for my company, what's the value going to be? This really gets people, really, really kind of focused on, what is the problem you're solving and what's the benefit to the business, which is really the key to the kind of the next steps for getting budget and getting alignment. Lee, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And, it's certainly alignment, I think, is kind of the key buzzword there. Your pitch isn't going to be successful unless it's aligned with the business objectives. But let's say now the proposals agreed upon. You're able to convince people that this is the right project to work on. It meets the business objectives, and business has given you the green light to move forward. What's next? How do you begin and drive the planning process to make that happen?
Well, let me just take one step back for a moment, because I think the first part is you've got the business problem, you've got an understanding, but then you've got to get somebody. If you're not the leader in the company, you've got to get somebody that has purse strings, either to invest people's time or dollars to say yes. And I
Yeah.
want to make sure this is a really important part before we jump to the next step for people to think about. And I'll go back to when I was at Cox, I had a $250 million budget. So I had people from all business units. And the amount of times where I saw somebody that maybe was 2 or 3 levels below me had gone and engaged a vendor to solve a problem and had really, really extensive conversations, but didn't bring me in till like the kind of check writing stage. And then I may or may not have been aligned. I may have understood some things around investment. We can make investment or not. So I would say the first part, that once you kind of understand it's a business problem, make sure you can articulate in business terms the benefit to the company, right? Because this is part of you really making a business case, right? And then you got
Right.
to figure out, who do you have to get aligned in your organization to make this move forward, right? So first of all is, do you need to get, people resources? Well, who's in charge of the people resources? Who's in charge of the budget? And my suggestion is to get them involved early. So for example, maybe you're going to investigate, you might say, hey, listen, I see this opportunity, this business problem. I think if we solved it, we could have these kind of things. Just a heads up, I was going to go investigate this with a couple of vendors. At what point do you want me to bring you in, to maybe the person that has the purse strings, if that makes sense. So I think it's really
That
important to get that alignment early on with whoever has the people resources or the budget resources.
I want to emphasize that because you bring up a very, very good point that, I said the assumption was you got the green light to proceed, but how many times have we had projects that were green lighted to proceed, but that didn't mean they were funded or that there was buy-in or that people really wanted to do the project. And those aren't the projects that succeed. You not only need permission to do the project or alignment with the direction, but you need to make sure the resources are available. And you mentioned two very important resources, people and budget. And those two don't necessarily always come from the same place, but they may come from the same place. Whoever in your organization is responsible for those two things have to be behind this effort as well as the business green lighting process. Go ahead.
I think that's so important, because I've had sometimes people that research a lot of projects and then brought me back into it later, brought maybe somebody that reported, somewhere, below me, because I've managed anywhere from, 2 to 1,000, right? And I think when I see like somebody that's constantly meeting with vendors, but didn't really get people buy-in, didn't really get budget buy-in, then sometimes I could almost wonder, like, what are they doing, right? Because they're spending a lot of activity, a lot of time doing all of these things. But if we're not aligned where we're going to invest it, then it's what I like to think about as activity over outcome. Whereas I think most leaders really look and try to challenge themselves to be outcomes over activity. So if you get that alignment, and that alignment, when I said again, budget, I thought about people, but you also have to think about, is there other alignment? Is this some new technology that's going to fundamentally change the way part of you do business? Like, for example, when we do blameless, right? A new way to do incident management. You not just have to have budget, you not just have to have people resources to go, but you also have to say, you know what, we moved to microservices. We know there's a better way to do incident management. And as a company, as a team, we're aligned to do it. So again, I think that's the first step. And then kind of once you've gone that, you've got the business case, you've got your leader, and also again, you've made a positive impression. Hey, I'm going to research to solve this business problem. I think we might be able to achieve these business outcomes. When would you like to get you involved? I think most leaders really, really appreciate that. Then you're doing the research. And this is also important because, not that we can see everybody's hand, but I bet if everybody raised their hand, how many times have you put your heart and soul in some sort of project only to find at the last minute there was no budget, it's good denied. that's just a waste of your time, your team's time. So I think getting that alignment early is critical. And then further, I'll just kind of hit this hammer nail one more time. Is I've seen a lot of companies where they've invested in big transformational projects where they're spending 2, 5, 10, $100 million. And if you don't get the right people involved and aligned, even if you get the budget, even if you get the green light, then afterwards it can be a failure. And I won't mention which one, but there was a large public healthcare company that I did some work helping them with, and they had just going back to cloud transformation. Of course, it was like 3 years after everybody already did cloud transformations because their healthcare companies sometimes they go a little bit slower. But they had literally failed 3 times. They had picked 3 different cloud providers and 3 times failed because they didn't get the right people aligned to that transformation.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I see in this area too is a lot of times you get a commitment, but the commitment will be a commitment to start the project. But we'll constantly evaluate as we go along to see if we're really committed to this project or not. And for some projects, that's the right way to do things. But a lot of projects, you just can't work that way. A prime example of a company I work with that did a massive cloud migration, and about a third of the way through I'm sorry, they were moving to the cloud, but it was a microservice migration before the cloud is what was really causing the problems. While they were going through this microservice transformation, they about a third of the way through, they decided this is just too costly. We can't justify this expense anymore, and shut down the project. So what they ended up doing is they didn't get any of the benefits of being able to move to this new architecture. They got the disadvantages of having their old architecture uprooted and partially transformed, and they ended up with a kind of warded together solution that was suboptimal altogether. And it was all because of the commitment to actually do the project that was needed, and the understanding of what was involved in that project just wasn't there.
No, I think that's so spot on. And again, I'm going to emphasize this, especially if it's a technology project. Make sure stakeholders, especially business stakeholders, understand the business benefit and business outcomes. Because, for example, if you do a microservices thing, well, what is that going to do for a company when they go to microservices? They're going to build software faster, deploy, have less outages, and you can quantify all those things into dollars and cents. But if you don't do that, and what maybe let's call it the sponsor or the business or business leadership, if the only thing they heard is microservices is going to make magic, and then the next thing they hear is we're not building any new software because we're working on the microservices project, well, you haven't set yourself up for success. And so I think that really that articulation of business outcomes, and then I think again going back to Lee, you asked this question about the green light. You've got the green light. Then you need to run this like a program. So keep articulating the business outcomes, track the steps that you're moving along that process till you have the outcome. Like I'll give you a simple example. I was talking to an engineering leader. I occasionally do a little bit of mentoring and coaching for kind of up and coming executives, some VC backed and others. But in this case, they had bought they wanted to buy some software that would help them understand the velocity of their engineering team. And so they just kind of were going to buy it. And I'm like, well, you need to articulate what's the benefit to the business. And you need to make that part of the plan, because otherwise you might buy this software. It's going to give us more visibility on the velocity of our engineering team. Well, great. What are you going to do with it? Right? Because that doesn't deliver any business value. So making sure to really make sure that plan goes to the ultimate point of conclusion, I think is absolutely critical.
So this might be a good time, Ken, I'd love to, I think it is a good story that I've heard you tell before, but I think is a very fitting here, is your breakfast meeting story with Cox Automotive and how that led to
Sure.
To a large cloud migration.
Yeah, well, I'll hit on 2 parts and then I'll dig into it. So when I was at Cox, I started the smallest business unit and the biggest business unit. kind of doing business transformation. So this was kind of, this is like 9 or 10 years ago. I can't remember at this point, but bringing in all of the modern things, born in the cloud, build in the cloud, you build it, you own it from a software team perspective. And at the same time, moving to microservices. So I'd already seen, like, for example, they went to microservices, but didn't change the way that they operate software. And Lee, you and I have seen this going back to, that's a cultural shift. And so if you just say, oh, the software team who really knows nothing about operations is going to go hire somebody called SRE and go build into the cloud, oftentimes those stories end up with breaches and other types of stories. You got to think about that cultural piece. So Cox, I'd already gone into cloud and brought that in and was really leading it in the biggest business unit. But Cox as a group was thinking, how do we go into the cloud? We like the idea of not owning, 12 data centers, the idea of, where a software team would say, hey, I need another server, and that's 2 weeks, and, a bunch of tickets back and forth to provision it. Like, they wanted to change that. And they were going all around back and forth. And so I remember I was having breakfast, and it just so happened like the RVP, I'm trying to remember her name, was in town from AWS. And I had a pretty similar thought of what modern software looks like. So cloud is part of it, but it's really a modern way of building software, of operating software, of thinking about value, again, outcomes over activity. And, of course, she wanted to sell Cox on AWS.
And AWS,
And I said, well, I'm a big fan of AWS. And at that point, AWS was kind of the early leader. Google Cloud, Azure didn't work most of the time at that point. And Google Cloud was very, very, I don't even know if they existed at that point. It might have been early. But
yeah, they did, but they weren't they didn't have as much.
They didn't have as much, right? And so I sat with her and I say, hey, listen, I think that embracing AWS is the right decision for Cox. And I'll tell you what, go bring Andy Jassy in. I think he thinks about what modern software looks like. I'll get all of the Cox global CIOs in a room. And let's talk, let's cast the vision of what the culture of innovation looks like when you build software correctly. And so they said, oh, great. So if you could do that, I'll do that. I said, yep, you get Andy in, I'll get the CIO. So Andy came over to Cox after finishing up at Coke when he came into Atlanta one day. And I sat down and, just kind of say, Andy, hey, listen, I don't want this to be a pitch about AWS. Let's just share it with the team. I think you and I kind of think about modern software and what that looks like. So I went into the first conversation, we went into like in services and said, hey, a lot of times when you're building services, you have service dependencies, and then this team is trying to innovate, but they have dependencies on that one. What do you do, right? Cloud certainly helps some of those things. And he shared, hey, we tell, if team A wants something from team B and team B can't deliver in AWS land, we'll just have team A build a copy of team B, because we're gonna focus on going fast. Now, that isn't obviously the solution for everybody. You don't want to build a bunch of redundant services, but we spent a lot of time talking about, like, what did it meant to you build it, you own it? What do it mean to be a microservices first? What does it mean to be auto scaling, from a cost perspective, from a speed to innovation? Because again, a lot of times software teams were waiting on hardware to innovate in software, which is simply crazy. So he came in, we had a great conversation, and that kicked off a $160 million cloud migration project that, I think is now written about a lot in AWS. And it was a funny story. Andy was telling me when we met that, he had tried to sell Kelly Blue Book before Cox had bought them. And so that was his dream to get in there. So it was kind of cool from that meeting. He finally got to sell Kelly Blue Book.
That's cool. Yeah, I have a Andy Jassy story of my own. So I worked at Amazon for about 8 years, and the first several years were at AWS doing several different projects. But ultimately, I was looking at transferring into AWS. Now, this was very, very early in the days of AWS. At that point in time, AWS had a server, EC2 instances, a few different sizes, but not very many. They had S3, and they didn't even really have a database or anything, just some very basic services. And there was an opportunity for me to move to AWS to build their first platform as a service offering. And all that existed is this 2-page document that described what they wanted to build. And it was a platform service versus a infrastructure service that allowed running applications. So start focusing on applications in the cloud, not just servers in the cloud. And it looked interesting, but AWS was a small little thing. How did I know it was going to take over the world? Really, we had no idea back then about that. But I got a call from Andy Jassy at home, and he called me to try and convince me to take this opportunity. And he basically set out in his phone call his vision of what he saw AWS turning into. And I don't remember the numbers of what he told me at the time, but they were at the time these giant numbers for what he envisioned AWS was going to grow into. And I bought into the vision, right? And now those numbers are well surpassed by long amounts. But I knew that what he was really trying to do was create something that wasn't just a bunch of servers that were for rent. It was a lot more than that. And so I came on board and started with a 2-page document, no staffing, a bunch of open headcount, and that's it. And I turned that into that initiative that obviously had the support of Andy Jassy and the rest of the organization into the Elastic Beanstalk service. The Elastic Beanstalk service was the very first primary platform as a service offering at AWS. Everything else up until then was things like servers and file storage. This was something that ran on top of those services. And we were innovative in several ways as we built the project. We were one of the first that used AWS technology to build an AWS service and things like that. And it was a great experience and a great project. But the only reason it succeeded was because you had someone like Andy Jassy who was behind and supported this drive for innovation. And that's what allowed these projects to get started. And AWS started a bunch of those projects at the time, and they all came to, or not all, but most of them came to fruition and turned AWS into what it is today. Let's get started here. So we've got a couple of questions here.
Yeah, and Lee, I just want to go. Rich in Q&A just had one live. So Rich, again, hello at Blameless to get the T-shirt, but I'll just ask that one. Let's go even deeper on alignment challenges. How often do you encounter people wanting to pitch an idea where the person pitching has a limited, at best, understanding of how the business actually works and how it makes money? Well, Rich, great question. So I would say in the prior lives as an executive, how many times have people come in and pitched ideas where they didn't really understand even the business outcomes, and it was clear that they just had an interest in some product that some vendor had got them excited about? Unfortunately, quite a few. Definitely that's something. And in many cases, it's not that they didn't understand the business. They didn't even understand the business problem they were solving. They just liked this solution and thought it would be interesting to have. So that definitely happens. And I would say, again, from an alignment, if you've got, I have this feeling, I always say there's leaders and managers. And my opinion is, especially in businesses like we're in technology, I don't think anybody needs a manager. We need leaders. And a leader is going to want somebody that can explain why we need this and what business outcomes. And the other part you asked on the back end of that is how the business actually work and how it makes money. And I would say that if somebody doesn't understand that, I put that kind of on leadership. I'm a big believer, that you want your software engineers, you want your product team, you want them to be in front of customers. You want them to understand why you operate the systems that you operate, how they make money, what it works. You just build better software, you have better teams. So I would say if people are pitching things but don't actually understand how the business works, that is a problem too, right? So that would make me not want to invest. But I would say if somebody didn't understand how the business operated, I'd put that a little bit on leaders. And if you are in a leadership position, I would challenge you to be transparent with your numbers, your revenue, your EBITDA, like how this business makes money, because that's only going to make your team make better decisions and be informed in making pitches for whether it be new features to build or new software to purchase, et cetera. Lee, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's actually a joint responsibility there. The person doing the pitch absolutely has to understand the alignment with the business, why this is important to the business, how this solves business problems. But you're right, it's up to leadership to make sure that the people in your teams understand what those issues are, right? Your business needs to be understandable to the people that are working in your business, or they won't be driving towards the success of your business. So, Rich K, if you send an email to hello@blameless.com along with your address and shirt size, we'll send a t-shirt off to you. We got another question here. This one is from Robert F. How do you manage the fears of moving from a large proven supplier to a smaller vendor? An example is a small ISP that offers internet services within a limited area.
Can we take that first, Lee?
Yeah, why don't you take a first shot at that?
So I think, you know, as someone making that decision, you need to think about what's the risk, right? So just going back to that specific things, if you think about you've got a huge vendor, you know, they're dominant, you know what service is going to look like, you know what all that looks like. And the reason they can do those things and deliver that quality of service, or in some cases lack thereof, is because they're the dominant player. You might get from a boutique, you know, a little bit more value. And that's where I would go back to, is just understand, you know, how in demand is their service? Do they have stability within the niche that they're serving? If so, I think that could make you feel comfortable that you're investing in a business. If it's something where they're still trying to figure out the business model, they don't yet kind of have market fit, you know, then, you know, you go into it as maybe you're taking a little bit more risk, which may be worth it if, let's say, the vendor's super innovative and they're going to, you know, stretch their product to meet your needs or something like that. Then I think, you know, that's another reason to potentially take that type of a risk.
Yeah. To me, this is a classic risk analysis, risk management problem, and if you don't have a formal risk management process that you use, if you don't think about risk as a management or as something that needs to be managed or understood and quantified, you should. Risk is something. If you do a proper risk analysis, decisions like this should just fall out. They should be very, very simple, very straightforward. The things to keep in mind when you are focusing on risk is you want to focus on two aspects of what is associated with the risk. The likelihood of something, in this case, bad, potentially bad happening or good happening, and the severity of that thing happening. If you understand those two things, you can go a long ways to putting a profile and being able to make the balance to see whether or not the advantages of moving to a smaller vendor, for instance, outweigh the cost of the risk because you've quantified your risk. So Robert F, please send an email as well, and you'll get a t-shirt. Shane P wrote in, this was before the webinar started. They wrote and they asked, what are SRE practices that transform software builds in a new way? And how is ROI measured on it? I know we talked beforehand about this, Ken, and I'd like your answer. Why don't you go ahead and answer this one?
Yeah, hopefully I remember the same answer, but I would say I think what Shane may be trying to say is, hey, we're building software in a new way, but we're not operating software in a new way. And so I want to instill a SRE practice. You know, how do I explain the ROI of why we want to have an SRE practice? And what I'll just say is, you know, operating in the old way of I've got this ops team and I've got the software team, and the software team builds software and they throw it over the wall, and then the ops team deploys it and then builds it. That's just slow, right? It's prone. You're going to have more errors. You're going to build software with more defects. And so that velocity of, I call it idea to production, is going to be much, much better with SRE. And so what I would do is think of, if you asked me this question and I was just talking to one-on-one, I'd probably reflect the question back to you. So you want to invest in an SRE practice. How will we know that it's successful? What did we accomplish? And that might be velocity. It might be, errors, might be recovery time, MTTR, MTTI, might be security risks because you've done a better operation with your pipelines. Lee, anything off the top of mind too, kind of things people might share?
Boy, you hit the big things. I think the more efficient processes in general leads to lots of things. Improved availability, even improved scalability of an application can happen with proper SRE practices. It can reduce your complexity too. And so if you can, the more you can wrap a measurement around those things, the more quantifiable it is, the more you can equate it into an ROI. And that's really what it amounts to, is we're trying to quantify benefits in business terms. And as long as you can do that, then you can calculate ROI that's appropriate.
Yeah, makes sense. And I will say is, please don't do this. I've seen recently a lot of companies where they've got an SRE practice, and then I listen and ask a few questions, just trying to be helpful with maybe a new leader. And basically they've renamed the ops team SRE and not given them any more resources and not changed the way they do it. So just, feel free. I'll just say personally, ken.Vranovic@Blameless. You can email me, any questions on any of these topics. If I can help in any way, don't need to get anything from it, just feel free to reach out to Lee or myself. You can, find us on LinkedIn, or even throw it after the hello. I think we've got 3 Q&As, Lee. I'll take the first one if that's cool.
That sounds great.
All right.
But Shane P, send us your email. Send us an email and we'll send a t-shirt out to you.
Yeah, again, hello@blameless.com. All right. Colette, what strategies would you suggest when pitching an idea that hits a foundational changes that will eventually remove friction in how things are done, but may not initially make any viewable changes? In other words, the impact will be incremental over time. More slow, sustained change instead of a bing bang, which so many leaders seem to love. Well said. Lee, you want to take that first? Do you want me to jump on that one?
This is the classic short-term versus long-term benefit. And my biggest piece of advice to you is be upfront about what the benefits are. Make sure it's clear what the costs and benefits are short-term and the costs and benefits are long-term. And if the costs are short-term and the benefits are long-term, you need to be very visible about that upfront. You also need an organization that's willing to think and invest long-term, and not all organizations are willing to do that. But if you can articulate the long-term value and in terms relatable back to the short-term cost, and make it clear that we're talking about long-term value, when you're going to see that value and when you're not going to see that value, that's your best chance for getting something like that through.
Yeah, and I would just say, so communicate the vision of where you're going to go at the end, and then communicate, again, this is a program, communicate progress along the steps, because other times if the benefits really down the road, if people don't feel like there's progress being made, then it's much more likely someone's going to pull the wool under that particular project. So that would be, my suggestion is cast the vision, but then make sure that you can articulate those incremental benefits on that way to that vision. So you said, hey, I said we're going to do this, and look at these proof points along the way. If you don't do that, and it starts to get in executives' mind, they're thinking about a lot of different other things. That's where, unbeknownst to you, somebody did a budget review and your project got canceled because they weren't what the benefits weren't top of mind, or the progress towards those benefits weren't top of mind.
Great. So Colette, send an email to hello@blameless.com and we'll send a t-shirt out to you. We're getting more questions in here. Let's go on to the next one, which is from John B. Do you have advice on how to pitch general productivity improvements, continuous improvement? I found it can be hard to sell since it often doesn't align to a specific business goal. You need to articulate what the right business goal is and it is aligning to. I can guarantee you that CI/CD processes will align to a business to business goals that are important, such as agility. Agility is an important business goal. Your leadership may not call it that. They might call it something else, but you need to figure out what the right terms are, express it in those terms, and pass it on to them. There is true business benefits there, and those goals are very quantifiable. Yeah. Ken, do you want to elaborate there?
No, I think that what you hit it was spot on, but I would just say again, I think it's really clear to articulate. You still want to align it to business goal, but for example, let's say that you're going to hire an SRE team, you're going to do CI/CDs, you're going to automate it. So there's put and push deployment. There's going to be auto rollbacks in the event that there's going to be like a canary deploy. So something pretty advanced. I'm just throwing that out there. So how does that align to any business objectives? Well, somewhere somebody has a bunch of software they want to build and they want to deploy it faster, and they want the ideas to be in production sooner, and they want to make sure that service is reliable. They don't have outages they don't have to have upset customers. And so you can articulate all of those things in those business terms. So if you think about it, what I would often consider is what are the key business goals? Hopefully your company's projected those, they've shared with those, and then just reverse engineer and ask yourself too, is if I do this thing, what's the ultimate benefit? Like, I know it's going to make somebody happier, but what is that ultimately going to do? And just keep asking it. Some people call it the 5 whys, but usually if you keep asking, okay, and why does that matter? And why does that matter? And why does that matter? You'll get to the business benefit, and then much easier to articulate it.
Yeah, I think even if you're in a large company that's still doing waterfall projects and old school mentality, you're talking about something like continuous deployment. It may not be obvious how the fit of that can fit in, but how much does your management talk about efficiency and how important efficiency is? Continuous deployment is a way to improve the efficiency even of water flow projects. But it's also a step towards other improvements that can then give you, like moving to agile, et cetera, that can give you other improvements and move you out of a waterfall eventually. So it's not always clear what the benefits are, but in something like this, there are benefits, but whatever the benefits are that you can imagine, you need to put them in the terms that your business really cares about and really is understanding. So John B, that was your question. You can get a T-shirt. I'll give the details at the end once more about the T-shirt rather than each time.
Yeah,
Devon L's. Oh,
yeah,
go ahead.
Let's jump in is on that, and just going back to the story of Andy Jassy, is everybody was focused on going to the cloud because that was the new magic shiny object. And for those of you who are new in your career, if you're at a larger company, at some point there's going to be some new technology, and someone's going to say, "What's our X strategy?" And it really would be like, "What's our cloud strategy?" Instead of how do
AI strategy
improve engineering? How do we increase our velocity? It's going to come up with the shiny object. So you just have to accept that's unfortunately the way some people work. But then you can take that and morph it and say it's not just about going to the cloud. It's about these benefits. And so, like in that meeting that I shared with you, Lee, I didn't anchor on go to the cloud. It's magically going to solve it. I focused on what are the business outcomes and what are the things, and cast the vision of what it looks like when you're building software in a modern way. And the cloud migration was just a component of that.
Yeah, I just wrote about this and in my newsletter the other day. You can look at LinkedIn if you want to see a copy of it. The whole idea that very early in the history of cloud, a lot of people just felt that getting to the cloud in and of itself was a goal that had value, and so that really led to the growth of lift and shift migrations, right? Where people just took their application and moved it as is, unchanged, and stuffed it in the cloud. And they thought, great, now I'm going to have all these great benefits because I'm in the cloud, wonderful. But they realized that the benefits you get from moving to the cloud, things like, dynamic resourcing and, the elasticness of resources and all of those, the cost benefits that are associated with that, just don't come for free with any old application that happens to be running in a cloud data center. You have to re-architect your application to take advantage of those benefits. And as long as you do that work, you can see the benefits, and the benefits of the cloud start showing up. But so many people just took to the mindset of moving to the cloud, that's the goal. And they did whatever it took to get their application to the cloud, and were disappointed with the results. Some of those have moved back off the cloud now, but it was an unclear knowledge or unclear understanding of what benefit you were trying to get to. It was moving towards a bright, shiny object, not to a real benefit. The benefit didn't show up. benefits didn't show up. In fact, the costs showed up that you didn't expect, and that's that's the way cloud migrations fail.
All right, Lee, we got to challenge ourselves. We've got 14 minutes and 3 questions, and we're going to answer them all and anybody else that comes in. So let's go. Devin,
We actually have 4 questions. Yeah. So why
right.
don't you go ahead with Devon?
I'll do the first one. I'm curious to hear your ideas getting a CFO to buy in. We as a small, medium-sized business, we get all the stakeholders together and we are looking to add software that would help, but always seem to run into the roadblocks of finance. What have you seen as really way to buy in, since the technology can be seen as just extra cost? So what I would say, Devin, having also been a CEO of a public company, and been like, I've been in all different ways where I'm pitching for things, or I'm the one that makes the decisions and all those kind of things, is you got to think about it from the CFO's perspective. How many times has a CFO invested in software, not necessarily your company, but in companies where a year later it wasn't even integrated, it wasn't even used, or even it was half used with the minor set of features? And if you ask the people, did you really get value out of it? It's questionable. So I would say, when you think about it, that's where the CFO is going to be. How is this not one of those software that really didn't deliver value? And this is where it gets a little tough, right? Because you've got your own personal reputation, and I'm a big believer, like, executive presence and just leadership, or even personal presence is important. But I would say, to answer your question, Devin, is you have to go to the CFO of what business things you're going to accomplish with that investment. And ideally, you have to be willing to tie into those results, right? So that he knows you're going to deliver those results. Because a lot of times, people like, especially in this environment with how tough jobs are, the people are like, I don't know if I want to, I guess I want that software, but I don't know if I want to put my name on, we're going to get those results. So I would say, I think you should do that. But if you're buying from a vendor, make them put their name on it with you, because they can help you get to those results that they're pitching you that you can achieve.
Next one is actually from an anonymous attendee, but if you recognize your question, still feel free to send an email and we'll send you a t-shirt. How do you create a culture free of personal agendas where everyone is looking for what's best for the company and what moves us forward? How do you also drive cross-team dependencies and alignment and protect how this disrupts the planned roadbed for the individual teams? I think this is kind of a continuation of what we've been saying all along, but Ken, do you have anything you want to specifically?
So I have a real tactical opinion on this that I'll share is, how do you get a culture free of personal agendas? That's always hard, because there's, like Adam Grant has some really good books on leaders, givers, and takers. And unfortunately, there's plenty of leaders out there that are takers. And those are really, really hard to get aligned. Let me just go move that one moved over. Hold on 1 second. I want to make sure I answer the full question. So that would be the first part, right? Is you try to get everybody aligned. Best thing, SMART goals, OKRs, something where everybody aligns. This is what we're doing is the key part. And how do you drive cross-team dependencies and alignment? And I'm going to talk about it in the product and engineering and business. It's real simple. I'm a big fan of quarterly planning. You put together a quarterly planning where you have your goals of what you're going to accomplish next quarter. You get business aligned, you get product aligned, you get engineering aligned. Then you go and you set that. When you set capacity, I'm saying this fast, I want to make sure we answer everybody's questions. Put 80% on the roadmap, 20% on other things that pop in. And then when new work pops in, if it can go to the 20%, great. They take it, they build it. You can still deliver on your plan. If it's more than that, what I typically have is a cross-functional escalation meeting, where then you bring this new thing that's going to blow up our roadmap. And when you do that, it really gets these different opinions, which normally kind of in a disorganized way come down on engineering or product. This puts it in a much structured way. So then you're discussing, hey, we're going to change our roadmap, but let's talk about it in business terms. And again, I have there's part in our book on that, but if you want to email me directly, I'd be glad to share some insights that I've developed that work really, really well at all different company sizes.
So Arun S. asks, shifting to the public cloud is a straightforward choice for many mid-sized companies. However, the sudden price hikes in public cloud services have necessitated a constant effort to minimize costs rather than prioritizing solution development. The recent significant cost spikes, particularly with services like BigQuery, custom instances, and support fees, have disrupted our plans with little warning. how do you navigate this challenge? It's sudden price changes. Those are all, that's a risk management problem, right? It's something you need to deal with from a risk management standpoint. I think there's a risk management aspect of this, but I think there's also a alignment issue here too, where is your application strategy, and your architecture of what you're building aligned with what the particular cloud services you're using are providing? If they are, you're probably using those services in a way that's optimized the way the cloud provider intended them to be used, and are probably coming down in price. But I see a lot of people, again, when they try and use the cloud in a way it wasn't designed for, or try and do things in a way it's different than normal, that they find themselves down a path where they're using a service not the way it was designed to be used, and those optimizations go away, and in fact can be prone to price increases and other issues. Price changes in services like the cloud are an indication of the cloud provider trying to give you guidance of what things to do and what things not to do. And so aligning your vision to those requirements is probably the best answer to that. Ken, I'm sure you probably have a lot.
Well, I just have, just
well.
because I've negotiated like, 10, 50, $100 million cloud deals. And so I'll just say is, if your spend is less than $1 million, as far as just pricing, you have no power. I'm just going to tell you, you have no power. Okay.
Yeah.
If it's more than $1 million, you have power. If you suggest that you might do multi-cloud, it's amazing where suddenly the no negotiations turn into negotiations. So once you get over $1 million, you can negotiate to some extent, especially if they think you're considering going multi-cloud as a strategy, which, by the way, increasingly people are designing to be multi-cloud, so they can optimize for where prices are, and thinking about how to have less cloud vendor lock-in. So hopefully that helps. And again, if you have more questions, feel free to reach out. Lee, anything else on that?
Yeah, multi-cloud is risk management at the cloud vendor level, really, is what it's all about.
Right.
But
we just got one cloud management might get you your discounts and your pricing where you need it to be.
Valid point. So valid point. Last question from Hank. Cloud is so 2 years ago. What's your AI strategy? That's a good question. Let me answer it. Let me see if I can answer it this way, Ken. So Ken and I are actively working on this one right now, and the best answer I can give is stay tuned.
Yeah, I'll give a better answer. Is
okay.
I've been in a lot of transformation. So in my 20s, the internet thing was going to be a thing. Built one of the larger web hosting companies. Microsoft's an investor, Verizon investor. I believe that AI, and I'll just say it straight up, is going to be more transformative in a lot of good and bad ways, depending on what your job is and what you do, in the next couple of years. It's going to be a massive change. The exciting part, that Lee and I will talk more about, we'll just give everybody a preview here, is we're going to start a new podcast. We've got some great people that invented some of the ways that LLMs actually work. We'll be talking to some other New York Times bestsellers, talking about, what AI is going to do from the people transformation. Because a lot of people, what is this going to do to my job? I thought I had a safe job. Or what is this going to do in product? There's ways that it can do really amazing things. Like here at Blameless, like we've got what we've publicly announced with AI, which people are using and loving right now. And we've got a whole slew of things that are going to just totally change the way incident management is done. But anyways, I don't want to pitch Blameless. I'll just say is Lee and I will have a AI. I forgot. Well, stay tuned for the name, but we'll have an AI-centric podcast with some really great guests starting in the next couple of weeks. So if you're interested, love for you to join. Again, it's no pitching zone. It's all about zero cost education, because this AI is going to be huge. It's going to impact our products. It's going to impact our jobs. It's going to impact every aspect of our lives. And so I think let's get educated together. So we're really excited about some of the guests that we've already got coming up. So more to come on that.
Yeah, so I can't give away a little bit more than I was going to say, but absolutely, I'm really excited about this new project that Ken and I have, and Again, we're not trying to pitch it, but I think from a podcast standpoint, you're going to really enjoy it. If you're interested in AI, you'll enjoy this podcast. And again, that podcast isn't a blameless thing, so it's not gonna be promotions of blameless or anything. This is Ken and I and our thoughts, and we'll be getting that going here very, very quickly. And I think that's it. So, Ken, thank you as usual. This has been a fantastic discussion. And thank you to everyone who's listening in. Remember, innovation is not a step, but a journey. Ken, do you have any final thoughts that you want to give?
Well, I'd say the final one, because hopefully the title is you have an idea, and I'll just say is go with your ideas, like get your passion, think about the business aspect of it, but it's amazing what happens both in a company, entrepreneurially. Like, I remember sitting, and this has been, people would debate, again, I was in my 20s, the internet was a thing, and I was like, this is going to be great. I can rent a server for $5,000 and rent it out for 10,000. And we grew from 0 to 200 million. That was just with an idea. And so I want to encourage everybody. And I've had people that have, worked for me that were, had a solution to something, but were shy, and just encouraging them to speak up, went on to become SVPs at big companies. So just, if you have an idea, go with it. Lee and I are all about giving back. So like a lot of times we do these webinars, it's not a pitch for Blameless. It's really trying to help you be successful. So feel free. I put my personal email. If you ever want, you could just send me an email. I'm happy to answer your questions, give you my perspectives, because I've been lucky enough to experience a lot of good and bad things, and happy to short circuit your learning curve. So thanks a lot for joining us.
And I just put my personal email in the chat as well too. If you have, especially if you have architectural or process questions, or system improvement, those sorts of questions, cloud migration, service migrations, I'm glad to help with any of those as well. Anyway, I think that's all we have. That's all the time we have. Again, I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you at our next webinar.
Thanks, everybody. Take care. Have a great day.